So my name is Eric Jacobson. I'm on the board of the New Jersey Association for Lifelong Learning, and welcome to the first of our free fall webinars. We're going to have a total of 6. The announcement that I sent out a couple weeks ago had 5, but we're going to be adding one that's going to be facilitated by Stephen Reeder, who is going to be our keynote speaker at next year's NJALL conference in May. So his webinar is kind of give you a teaser of what he's going to talk about during the conference, which is thinking about how do we reach learners who traditionally have been harder to reach. Like, how do we work with hard to reach learners? So he's going to be talking about that. I'm going to send out a revised announcement so everybody knows when that is, and as a reminder of what some of the other webinars are going to be about. So as with all NJALL webinars, we're going to be making an archived version of this available on our YouTube channel. And everybody that is online today will get a certificate of participation. And I will also send you a PDF of Cynthia's PowerPoint. So that way you don't have to worry about trying to write everything down. She's going to be sharing a lot of information. And so don't, get caught up trying to write everything down. You'll get a PDF of it. And as always, you can email us at njall at our Gmail account if you have follow-up questions about this. So just a couple of other logistical things. I have everybody muted right now because there's a number of people online and we want to keep the audio quality good. So the way that we're going to allow for interaction is 2 different ways. So one is if you raise your virtual hand on your control panel, I'll be able to unmute you and then you can ask a question or make a comment directly. So why doesn't everybody look to their control panel and raise their virtual hand to make sure you see, hi Kathy, I see Kathy's hand, I see Thomas's hand, I see Bernie's, I see Barbara's, I see Michael's, Phyllis's, Kathy's, HTML5 viewer user. I have a cousin named that. So it looks like most people have found their virtual hand. This is the part where I always feel like I'm from Romper Room and date myself. The other way that you'll be able to communicate your ideas or your questions is through the question section of your control panel. And Cynthia, I think you had a particular question that you wanted them to answer to get started by using the question section.
Yeah, should I say what that is now?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought people might introduce yourself and say a little bit about how transportation is important in the lives of your students. Where does it come up? What challenges does it create for getting to class or managing other parts of life? Anything that you've noticed with your students, and then that would kind of get us thinking about transportation and just get us thinking about the relevance of this issue in our students' lives.
Great, that's a good question. So in your question section, you can type that up and then send it, and then I will be able to read those responses back. And then, if there's 2 or 3 answers that have more or less the same answer, I'll be able to synthesize some of those answers. And while you're doing that, I will introduce the speaker today. So Cynthia Peters is the editor of the Change Agent, which hopefully many of you know already. She was our keynote speaker 2 years ago at our NJALL conference and did a workshop there. And this is her 2nd or 3rd, I think, NJALL webinar. So she's a longtime supporter of the work that NJALL is doing in the state of New Jersey. And we're very happy that she's the first facilitator of our webinar this year, talking about transportation issues and building creative lessons. So without any further ado, Cynthia, I turn it over to you, and I await people's, some of the answers are starting to come in. So Thomas says that he teaches an adult population who mostly rely on public transportation, right? So in fact, it hits them immediately because it's how they get to class. It's how they're getting to programs. Barbara notes, that most of their students use public transportation for both work and study. Bernie says most of the students take public transportation to the school, so they need to know how to communicate when they get lost and need directions, right? So life doesn't come with a GPS. And then they need to understand the bus and train schedules, right? So some of the specific aspects of public transportation in their towns.
Great. Yeah, so if more of those roll in, please feel free to interrupt me and share those. It's great to hear that. I think that, one of the reasons we picked transportation as a theme for the Change Agent is because we like to pick relevant topics that adult learners are kind of thinking about, struggling with, dealing with in their daily life, and then we like to create content for teaching literacy skills and math skills. in the context of an issue that matters to students. So you all are kind of reinforcing the importance of the topic. So here are the 4 things we're going to cover in this hour, and you'll notice that I might be talking a little bit quickly sometimes, or just maybe sharing a slide just to give you a glimpse of something, but we might not spend a lot of time on it, and then other slides we'll sort of spend more time on and dig into more deeply. But there are going to be a couple times where I'm just kind of touching on something just to open a window into the concept. But the 4 main areas that we're going to try to cover are using graphic organizers, extending knowledge, in the context of some relevant issue, exploring a career ladder in transportation, and then also taking action. So we're already gotten started on the warm-up, and I'm glad to keep receiving more of your answers to that question as the webinar rolls along. We'll just dive right into graphic organizers. The point of graphic organizers is, I have a few bullet points here. They really do push students to do a careful read, and they have to comprehend the piece more fully because they're charged with picking out the details and then sorting them according to the mandate of the graphic organizer. So it helps students go more deeply into a piece that they otherwise might just kind of skim over. It also gives students a strategy for figuring out the main idea of a piece. And this is because, once they've sorted that information into a grid of some sort, then now they have a visual take on the text that they didn't have before. And that can help, kind of make the main idea come to the surface. It also helps students see how charts work. And this is so important because when you have to organize the information yourself, vertically as well as horizontally, you're getting a hands-on experience in creating a chart. And so the next time you're confronted with having to read a chart or interpret a chart, you will have actually made one yourself, and so you're going to be better able to interpret one. And then finally, it really helps students think about their own writing, because if you take apart somebody else's writing and see the building blocks of it, then that helps you think about how to do your own writing and to think about your writing as a series of building blocks. So now we're going to look at a few graphic organizers. So the first one, this isn't a graphic organizer. This is a very messy slide with a lot of pieces of information on it. What it is the first 5 articles in the transportation issue. And I just grabbed the headlines from each one and the little icon that goes with it. So you'll see the very first article is one about riding a bicycle to class, and it has a bicycle icon. And then there's one about walking, and that's actually written by a New Jersey student. She goes to the Trenton area soup kitchen, and she's written for the Change Agent several times, actually. So we got some repeat writers, which is really great because you can watch their writing develop, and they get multiple opportunities to be edited and to kind of have a process with an editor. And so if anybody out there wants to think about bringing the call for articles into their classroom, I recommend you do that. You can find it on our website. We have a deadline coming up November 4th, by the way, but maybe I can get more into that later. So this slide just kind of gives you a glimpse of the first 5 articles of the magazine. And then what I did was I created a graphic organizer, which calls back out, those icons. It also includes the picture of the author. With every article written by a student, we like to include their picture and also a little bit of biographical information. And then it has 2 columns. So the student would have to go back and look at the article and find something positive about using a bicycle as a form of transportation, as well as something challenging about it. And they would do that for each one of these forms of transportation: biking, riding a car, riding a bus, walking. And then the last one, which is the little thought cloud, that's kind of where we get a little metaphorical. That's written by a prisoner who talks about how he, quote unquote, leaves prison every night and how he uses his imagination to leave the prison behind. And it's great. It's written at a slightly higher level than the other ones, but it's very accessible still, and it's kind of a chance to lift up that idea of metaphor too in your classroom. So this is our first graphic organizer, and I think you can see that it's accessible to lower literacy levels. The pieces are written at mostly sort of a third, fourth, fifth grade level. And according to researchers, it's really important to start teaching graphic organizers early on because it's a key academic skill as well as a workplace skill to be able to sort and organize information. And it's good to start at a low level that has these kind of handholds that I created, the icons and the photographs. So the student is essentially doing research here. They're going back, looking at a text, and then entering that text into a format. It's a sort of a early way of doing research.
Cynthia, can I chime in here for a second? I think the
Yeah.
other thing that would be interesting is that I'm betting that in some of these articles, because most of the articles are student written, but some of them are written by teachers and others, that in some of these articles, the something positive and the something challenging are going to be explicitly spelled out. But in other articles, it's really going to rely on students inferencing, right? And that they're going to be able to read between the lines to find the things that are positive and challenging. So this chart, this graphic organizer, I think is great for literal interpretations, but I think it also leaves room for inferencing as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great idea. A teacher could, I think there actually is plenty of stuff you could infer that would be positive and challenging. So you could do it either way, literal or inference, or you could do both. And that would
Mhm.
be a great teaching opportunity. Yeah. So this slide just, I put this here just to point out the different levels of the pieces. I didn't even notice this when I put the articles together, but they kind of go sequentially 3 through 7, the first 5. So you can pick and choose as a teacher which ones to use and which ones not to use. If level 7 and 6 are too hard for your students, you can stick with the first 3. So I just threw this in here just to show you the flexibility of the change agent and the multi-level nature of the change agent. And hopefully it gives you a lot of different ways to enter into the material. Also, another thing that is available on these pages is activities that are maybe related only to that one piece. So just referencing this piece by Sigrid Burris again, she's our New Jersey writer, there's an activity that's just relevant to her piece at the bottom of that page. And the activity is to evaluate a paragraph to find you pick any paragraph and find the topic sentence and then cite the details that back up her topic sentence. So it's just another opportunity for a student to break down a paragraph, break down a piece of writing, think carefully about a piece of writing. A teacher, I don't have too much space on the page, but any teacher is going to be able to launch his or herself from this pretty easily, onto things like critiquing the paragraph. Maybe some paragraphs are more successful than others. Maybe some topic sentences are more successful than others. You could think about why, what makes a good one, what makes a less good one. You really could unpack this piece, and a student would have a chance to do a lot of critical thinking, and it would support their own writing. Okay, here's another graphic organizer that is a kind of another low literacy way to enter into this material. The grid is very simple. It's just 2 columns, something that Adeline likes, and then why she likes it. So the piece is written very methodically. You'll notice. I don't know if you can read the text on your screen or not, but she's very methodical about something that she likes to do while she's traveling, and then she's very clear about explaining why she likes it. And so again, it just gives the student a chance to look at the mechanics of the piece. How did she choose to structure her writing? There is such a thing as structure in writing, and then you have to make a lot of choices when you're deciding how to present something. And so this helps break it down and put it in kind of visual columns that help you see it in a different way than when it's just line after line of text.
The other thing I think is interesting in this one, if you say down on the bottom, that students to make a new chart showing what they and their classmates like to do while traveling. I think this is a perfect opportunity to extend this into an ESL class. So you can create an information gap type of thing where students are expected to go around and get information from 5 or 6 other classmates right? And by doing so, they have to use the English that they're working on to get these questions answered. So in addition to just thinking about writing, you can also think about it as an interactive activity within an ESL classroom.
That's a great idea. And in addition to building their English language skills, that's going to build community in the classroom. People
Right.
are going to get to know each other better. There's going to be laughter. There's going to be milling about. And as we know from the persistence literature, building community is really foundational to helping students persist in
Right.
school.
Hey, you take the 28, I take the 28. You take the 2, I take
Right.
the 2, right? So you can kind of connect that way.
And also, where you been? I haven't seen you for a couple
Right.
weeks,
Right.
and just noticing, who's here, who's not here, what happened.
Right.
Those are really important. Well, I have one more graphic organizer to share with you, and then I actually wanted to pause a little bit and get people to raise their hands and think about ways that they use graphic organizers, or just share your thoughts on how you might bring this into the classroom. So if you want to be thinking about that while I share one more, then you'll be ready when I say, oh, time to pause and share your thoughts. Okay, the next one, I put this out as a two-page spread because I wanted you to see what it looks like in the magazine. When you turn to page 16, 17 in the magazine, this is what you see. Two articles, very almost exactly the same length, and then two grids that are very similar in what they ask the student to do. So with this little bit of repetition, I think students are going to get an extra chance to kind of gain mastery over grappling with this specific graphic organizer. So now I'm going to zoom in on just one of them, the first one. This is, both of them are immigrant students comparing transportation systems in their country of origin with the transportation system in the United States. So this man is from Afghanistan, and he talks about the differences between US and Afghan transportation systems, and as he says in the title, they're as different as sky and land. And the graphic organizer asks students to look at two basic categories, and within transportation in Afghanistan and transportation in the United States, and then within those categories they're broken down further by infrastructure and people's choices. So infrastructure, that's a mouthful of a word, great vocabulary word, a hard word, but it's good, important to kind of put out those hard words and give people a chance to practice them and grapple with them. And so a student in this graphic organizer is going to go back and look at the piece and notice what is transportation infrastructure in Afghanistan like, and put some of the details in the boxes, and what are people's choices about how they behave around transportation in Afghanistan, and fill out those boxes, and then do the same process in the United States. So it's pretty complex. It's a pretty short text, but all that richness is in there. And by doing this process, students are going to really unpack this piece. They're going to understand the vocabulary. They're going to understand how the details support the person's main idea, which is that these two kinds of transportations are as different as land and sky, and give a student a chance to think critically about it. Does he make his case? Does he not make his case? What might you need to know more about to be more sure of his main point? And then this a similar grid for the next piece, which is a woman who's comparing travel in South Korea with travel in the United States. So those are our various graphic organizers, and I know I went through them pretty quickly, but I'm hoping it might have prompted people to think about how you might use these in the classroom, what you might do differently, or how you might extend your use of these. What kinds of graphic organizers do you already use, and what sort of success and challenges have you had with those? Anything you would like to comment on or share. We have a lot of great teachers in this webinar, and we can all learn from each other too. So I'd love to hear, if you want to unmute, if somebody's raising their hand, I'd love to have them unmuted and share.
Right. So you can either raise your hand and I can unmute you, or using the question function, you can share your ideas with me, and then I can share them with everybody. I think one of the points that Cynthia made early on that's really important is that graphic organizers are particularly interesting to think about with the transportation topic, because a bus schedule, a train schedule, these are all pieces of information that are organized graphically, right? And you have to be able to read charts and down and across. So I think transportation readily lends itself to thinking in terms of organized data and organized information. And I think the other nice thing that you've highlighted is that in the change agent, which every twice a year has a different theme, has student submitted papers, has both the stories, but then also activities to go along with it, so that in the classroom you can kind of build off these things.
Yeah,
So
and another thing you could do actually is you can role model how hard it is and how it's okay to struggle with trying to understand these bus schedules. Because I have to say, I was in a city recently, and I was trying to use the bus, and I was at the bus station reading the grid, and I could not make heads or tails of
yeah,
this grid. And I just sat there saying to myself, wow, this is
yeah,
impenetrable to me. And
yeah,
and just role modeling that in front of the class, at how hard something can be, but then trying to stick with it, trying to use everyone's minds together, taking it apart little by little. Maybe you can't understand the whole thing, but maybe you can get certain parts of it. Maybe you can figure out how to ask questions about it. That is a great opportunity too, because let's be honest, sometimes it is very hard to make heads or tails
right.
of
And
these
you may have
schedules.
and you may have some students in the class who are bus schedule masters,
That's right.
and they could
Mhm.
explain to everybody else. So thoughts that people want to share about either graphic organizers more generally or graphic organizers around the topic of transportation? You can type in versus the question via the question area, or raise your hand. Oh, Michael, let's see. I'm going to unmute Michael. Hi, Michael. You want to share a comment? Yep. Michael, you there? Oh, okay. I'm going to mute Michael back up. Maybe there's a delay. Oh, he's typing in. So he likes to use graphic organizers. This is Michael saying he likes to use graphic organizers with his students in their pre-writing an essay. Typically, they know about their topic, but often don't consider what their reader won't know, right? Indeed, as a writer, you have to anticipate the questions your reader's going to have, what your audience is going to know, what they're not going to know. And so graphic organizers is a good way to think about that.
Mhm. Great idea. Thank you, Michael. I
All
mean,
right.
we could keep going, and then as
Yeah.
people think of things, they can type it out. Just to give people a heads up, the next two categories are extending knowledge and looking at a career pathway in transportation. So after that, I have a little scheduled break to kind of get more thoughts and ideas from people in the webinar. So if you want to gather up your thoughts and be ready to share them in about 15 minutes or so, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, so extending knowledge. So we all know that one of the new mandates of the College and Career Readiness Standards is that students, the GED, a lot of the high school tests, the HiSET and the GED, et cetera, they're not just reading comprehension tests anymore. They actually require students to have certain levels of knowledge. So any opportunity that we have to extend knowledge, we can sort of use a relevant and interesting and engaging article as our starting place and then build from it. That helps us bring in the knowledge pieces that students know. The other good thing about extending knowledge is that they often present research opportunities, and research is a great way for people to build their literacy skills. So let's look at some examples of this. Here is this really great piece that we got from a Syrian student from Connecticut who's in Connecticut now in class, and he wrote this story about trying to use his GPS one day when he was trying to get somewhere. I think he was trying to get to class, but he didn't have it in walk mode. He had it in drive mode. And so the GPS was telling him to get on the interstate, having him walk down a ramp and all this stuff. And it was freezing cold, and the whole thing was an utter failure. And he had to kind of return to the train station or wherever he was coming from and call a friend for help. But that's how he learned about walk mode versus drive mode. So it's a very sweet story with one person's kind of mishap. It's something that any of us could relate to. And then it's got this little graphic that shows the satellites going around the Earth and suggests this way that they calculate your position based on how you are relating to all these different satellites. And so this is just a jumping off point. There's not a lot of content here for you to go off of in terms of learning about the Earth or learning about satellites, but it really brings up some really fascinating stuff, like how do satellites work? What are they? Why don't they fall out of the sky and kind of fall down on the ground? You know, what is the Earth's atmosphere? You know, where does gravity happen? Where does it start to get thinner? It would be a great research topic. It would be something you could send students off to try to learn more about, and then have them come back and do a little presentation on it. And then, not to mention, you know, learning more about the how to use GPS, how to use different apps on your phone to help you get places. Just connecting back to public transportation. You know, there's you can use public transportation mode, and that will help you find out how to get a bus or a train. And again, referencing Eric's point, a lot of student expertise is going to surface here, and that's a great way to lead your class, is to allow student expertise to surface. And I always find my students in my class, they have much more expertise about how to use apps and their phones and things like that than I do. And so whenever it's possible for the student to be the expert, then they have a chance to use their English and to use it in a way that is really confident, where they're expressing something they know a lot about. Here's a story by a man who was born in Bhopal in 1932, and he talks about how one time he and his family set out on a camel-pulled wagon, and they were going to be on an all-night journey to get to another village. And at some point, the camel got to a neem tree and ate all the leaves around the neem tree and ended up pointed back in the direction of home. And so by the time they all woke up in their cart, they were back in their home village again. And so it's a sweet story that brings up some interesting things, including in his biography, we find out that in 1932, Bhopal was actually was called British Central India. And you can sort of figure out, okay, well, why was it called British Central India in 1932, and then why is it called Bhopal now? What happened there? Maybe some students will know something about Indian history. They might be able to say something about colonialism. They might have heard of Mahatma Gandhi, who, you know, of course, led the nonviolent revolution against British control. And they might know that Gandhi informed other leaders of social justice struggles all over the world, including Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. And, you know, there's all sorts of ways to grow off of that one little bit of information. And, you know, you can pick in your class, you know, which direction it's going to go, or how you want to work it, or students might, if through their own interest, you know, say which way they want to take it. But in the magazine, you'll find, you know, these photos and these prompts for how to take it forward. I also included this picture of the very fascinating neem tree, which it turns out is a virtual pharmacy for humans. It can be used for all kinds of preventive as well as curative medicinals. And students in your class might have heard of it or know of it. A great research topic to go look up the neem tree and find out all the different ways that it's used for human health. So those are some ideas about how to start with a piece that's basically just an engaging and fun read that will make people laugh and think, and will probably have similar stories about transportation moments that went wrong in their life, and then ways to extend it into actual history and even science.
I'm going to use neem the next time I play Scrabble. It's got that nice double
Oh,
E. You know, it's
yeah,
a great little word. I never thought of that word.
yeah, yeah. And if you can get that M on a triple
Right,
letter score, then you'll be
right,
all right.
right.
Here is Annette Bowen, who lives in Atlanta, and she wrote about riding public transportation with her mother in the 1950s, and hearing stories about her mother riding transportation before she was even born, and then what it's like riding in public transportation in Atlanta now, and what's different and what's the same. And so there's much that has changed about racial segregation around in public transportation, and there are some surprising things that have stayed the same. It's very interesting to read this piece and see what she has to say. And I added as an extension here something about Homer Plessy, who was the African-American man who brought a suit against the train company, a Louisiana train company, when he was asked to move out of his seat. And this became the famous Supreme Court case, Plessy v. Ferguson, and it gives students a chance to learn about in specific detail about a Supreme Court case that had a huge impact, that laid the groundwork for Jim Crow. It also gives students a chance to just think about, well, what is the Supreme Court, and what is the whole judicial branch, and how does this work, and how does this relate to checks and balances, and all the things that students need to know about student government. This is a great way in. And of course, it also did not get, this particular decision did not get reversed until Brown v. Board of Education, a very famous Supreme Court case, which students, should know, which all of us should know. And that brings up another whole segment of U.S. history, which is fascinating, which is great to study, which is really relevant. So this article by a student at Literacy Action Inc. in Atlanta, Georgia, gives rise to some really fascinating history. And I believe, and I've seen this in my own classes, when you start from a platform of just high interest, high level engagement, and written by a peer, written by somebody where the bio says, they're trying to get their GED in their program, and then if that's your starting place, you have such a rich way into many other topics. And it's a lot less alienating for students to learn that way, I think. Okay, one more piece, two more pieces, and then we're going to see if we can chat a little bit. Andy Nash wrote this piece, What is Transportation Justice? Because many of our articles were sort of bringing up this question of justice, and so she explores, what do we even mean by this? And I found this great graphic, which maybe people have seen before, where it looks at the difference between equality and equity. Can people see that on their screens? It's a really great discussion, this little graphic. In the equality side, each person gets the same size crate to stand on. Now, isn't that equality? I mean, everybody's got the same thing. Versus equity, which is more about the outcome. In the equity scenario, everybody can see the game. In the equality scenario, everybody had the same size crate, but only two people could actually see the game. And in the equity scenario, everybody's kind of got their head above the fence and can see the game. So it's a great discussion starter, a great little set of vocabulary words to kind of ponder, argue over, debate. You could shift that to any number of contexts and think about them. I provided some pictures of historical transportation justice issues starting with the 1960s, when freedom riders wanted to desegregate buses, and then in the 1980s when disability rights activists demanded access to buses. So that's a great sort of equity moment, right? I mean, you could say to the people in wheelchairs, well, hey, here's a bus, everybody's got the same bus for everybody, that's equality, but actual equity would be that people in wheelchairs could actually get on the bus, so there's a way to demonstrate equity versus equality. And then finally, I referenced some of today's struggles for affordable fares. There's a lot of bus riders unions all around the country. There's probably a bus riders union somewhere near you. And I love the possibility of students being able to research in their own communities, in their own cities. Are there people fighting for transportation justice right here in my city? Should I find out what they're doing? Should I join them? Should our class write a letter to our transportation company and about an issue that we're facing? There's all sorts of ways you can take this, and we're going to talk more about that when we talk about the last segment of our webinar, which is on taking action. So we'll get to that shortly.
I think this is a good time to chime in where Thomas was saying that his classes are made up of students from many different cultures. And so as they're extending their knowledge or having these conversations, they're sharing public transportation stories from their countries, from their own countries, right? Like you had. And then it gives them a chance to see that they have similarities, even if they're from different countries, different cultures, that they have similar stories about accessing, riding, maybe even some of the limitations of public transportation where they're from. And he pointed out that when he went to Italy this past summer, he didn't speak Italian, but he was able to get around because he knew kind of how public transportation systems work. And so students can draw on that kind of knowledge that they bring with them, even if they're still working on their English skills.
That's great, yeah. Yeah, and if you, when you read through the magazine, you'll notice there's even, we think we have a student from Haiti and a student from the Dominican Republic talking about how There's no such thing as a schedule, and there's not even any such thing as a predetermined price. The driver kind of tells you how much to pay when you get on the bus, and you can never be sure if the bus is going to come in 5 minutes or 2 hours, and some really interesting stuff.
Sounds like when I lived in Oakland.
Yeah. Okay, well, one more piece in this category was written by a group of Atlanta students, and what they did was they researched how to get the half-fare MARTA card. MARTA is the name of the Atlanta Rapid Transit System, and many students qualify for a discount card, but to qualify, it's pretty complicated. As this article says, you can't just waltz into your MARTA office and ask for one. You have to bring a doctor's note, you have to have a diagnosable illness or something, and there's some hoops you have to jump through. So this story tells about that, and then at the end of the article, on the next page, we have the conditions and disabilities that MARTA requires you to have to get a half-price card. And I thought this was a great example of having to interpret a hard document. And I do this in my class sometimes. I'll bring a hard document that's relevant and important to the learners in my class, but is like just written way high level. And we just spend some time trying to break down this very hard document. And we're motivated to do it because it really matters. It's going to mean something in our life. And we figure out reading strategies for how to try to get the main idea of it, despite the fact that we don't understand a lot of the words. So I put this is an adapted version of the conditions and disabilities thing from the MARTA website. But you can see a lot of intense vocabulary here, a lot of long words, but really important words, and they could matter for all of our students who might be trying to apply for a discounted subway card. They might have to confront this vocabulary, and they might have to be able to think about this vocabulary, talk to their doctor about how to get a letter related to the words in this list. And then of course there's an opportunity to practice with the vocabulary. So it looks like hard words, but I think it's great when we're in our ESOL classes, when we kind of bring this kind of vocabulary in and give students that challenge. There's a little activity here too, which is just to conduct research in your own town, find out if there is a discount transit card available, what's the monthly price for that card, what qualifies you to get the card, and then where would you go to get the card. And there could be another activity where you interview classmates or community members about their experiences getting the card. What was it like? Was it hard? Did you feel like you were treated well? What were the key questions to ask? Things like that. And then it would be so cool if a program could present the results of their research to the whole program. So other classes could benefit from this research, so that whether it was a poster that could be displayed on some big bulletin board, or whether they developed a PowerPoint presentation, they could go around to the other classes and present their, just even a 10-minute PowerPoint on how do you get a half or a discount fare card here in this part of New Jersey. That would be so great for everybody's speaking and listening skills, their reading and researching skills, and then their presentation skills. And these are all completely, required in the new CCR standards, including that presentation piece. Students are supposed to be able to use technology to present information. So this could be a hands-on way to do it that would also just have immediate benefits for people in your program.
Yeah, I think before we switch to the next topic, the career ladder, I'd like to ask people, have you done this kind of research-based activity in classrooms, either around transportation or around related topics or other topics that really showed what your students were interested in?
Eric, something just happened to your sound. Do I still sound normal? Because you sound really funny.
I sound faint. All right,
I don't know if other people are experiencing it or not, but each syllable is drawn out in a really funny way.
Oh, all right. Hopefully, is it better now?
Not really.
No,
See if anybody else is having this problem, because if they're not,
other people are hearing it's bad. All right, so I'm not gonna say anything then because my mic might be messed up. So I think you should just keep going.
All right. Well, it's quite comical when you do talk because, you know, we can kind of understand you, but it sounds like a cartoon or something. It's really weird.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, if people raise their hands and want to add something, that would be fabulous. I would love to hear your voices, and Eric can see your hand go up and he can unmute you, and we'll see if you sound like a cartoon character. So please do chime in if you want. While people are thinking about that, I can move us on to looking at this career ladder. And this career, so obviously many of our students are in class because they want to get better jobs. And we always talk about career ladders. And unfortunately, what I've noticed is so many career ladders aren't really ladders at all. They're sort of like career lily pads or something. You know, you kind of hop from thing to thing, but they don't really necessarily build on each other. But I found this career ladder, which actually to me looks like a real ladder, meaning you could start at the bottom and kind of work your way up, from a school system in Iowa. And it's the Transportation Distribution and Logistics Career Ladder. So, you know, working in transportation can mean many different things. And I try to start this section of the magazine with this opener where people can just ponder these kind of dramatically different ways of being in transportation, from infrastructure repair, like you see that person working on the bridge, to distribution warehouse worker, because when goods and products are transported all across the country, you know, there's all sorts of levels of work that go into that, including moving boxes all around, and, you know, using technology to track things. There's also being a truck driver, and then there's something like being an air traffic controller. There's a huge spectrum of transportation jobs. So the one we picked was this career ladder for transportation distribution and logistics, partly because it really had the best career ladder. You could start out as an assembler, a picker, packer, sorter. You know, we say what skills you need to be able to do that, and then what education level is needed for that. And then you can work your way up little by little. You can get certified as a logistics technician, and your pay goes up significantly. And the certification, I looked it up, and it takes different amounts of time, you know, but sort of like one semester. You can get your Class A commercial driver's license, which is a 3 to 7 week course. And then, you know, truck drivers make, as you can see, something like $16 to $25 an hour. And then there's an associate's degree in logistics, and you can see the pay continues to go up, and then there's a 4-year degree. So I just thought this was an interesting thing to share with students who are thinking about trying to get better jobs. When you're thinking about what to enter into, one of the things to think about is there a career ladder in this work, or is it more or less dead end? So I put this chart in, which I thought was just a great chart to try to take apart. When I first looked at this chart, my eye was kind of like, what are these bubbles doing in this chart? I don't even understand this chart. And that often is how I feel, because I'm a very text person. My eye wants to go left to right, left to right. It just wants to read text. But charts are so good. They're so challenging to me because my eye can't do that. My eye has to float all around and see what's going on and sort of take it apart in a different way. So I love bringing charts into class and just giving people this question: what do you see in this chart? You know, you just tell me anything that you see going on in this chart. And that's how we start to break it down. People might say, well, I see the title is X, or I see on the left column there's a bunch of, you know, dollar figures for median wages. You know, and then little by little, the more you notice the elements, you put them together just like a puzzle, and you start to see what the chart is doing. And the chart is telling you which transportation jobs are above the median wage level and which ones are below, and which ones kind of straddle it. This article also has, you know, descriptions, job descriptions, which I think is really helpful for students to be able to read those and understand them and sort of imagine themselves in those positions. Even if what you're doing is just saying, well, I don't want to do that, well, that's helpful. You know, that can be really helpful. You know, a process of elimination is one way to go forward thinking about what you want to do. The other thing that I think is really helpful here is that at the bottom we said, we have this little box titled "Get Ahead at Your Job. Here are some questions you can ask." And we give students these questions that they could ask their supervisor or other people that they work with. I teach a class at a hotel, a downtown hotel here in Boston, and my students had no idea that the hotel offers job shadowing. And this was a revelation to my students, and they were so excited about this. They actually get paid time to shadow somebody else in their job, and that way learn about what that job is like, and then they can consider applying for that job. So it's a great thing. None of them knew about it, and so just figuring out what are the questions I need to ask in my job to figure out how I might be able to move forward in my job. That right there can be hugely meaningful in the classroom. We end our little section with an article by a student in Boston who writes about being a bus driver in Jamaica, I think it was, where he's from. So this is a great story about what a multitasker you have to be if you're a bus driver. And then at the bottom, I created this little opportunity for people to log on to bls.gov and look at the Occupational Outlook Handbook and look up bus driver jobs, and see what the median pay is, what the requirements are, how you get the training, and what the job outlook looks like for that job. And then that introduces people to the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which is a great resource for students who are doing career exploration. Just being able to navigate around that thing, that is a really, it's so rich, it's so interesting, there's so many things. And this also lends itself to, maybe another PowerPoint presentation, where they collect some data that they get and they put it together in a PowerPoint, and then they present it to other classes, or they put it on a poster in the coffee room or something, and people can learn more about job options. So that is our extending knowledge and career exploration section. And if Eric sees any hands up, I'm going to ask him to unmute those hands so that we can hear from you.
Is my microphone any better, or is it still sound cartoony? All right.
Yes, you sound like you.
All right. So I can either unmute you, or if you send some things in. Thanks, Thomas. So if you send comments in by the question area too. I think this idea of getting specific about the different career ladders, I think, is really, really important. One of the things that's being stressed in WIOA is to make sure that it's an actual pathway, right? That you can go from one program to a next until you're finding the training or the job that you want. And the whole idea is not to have isolated programs. So a student does a lot of work and then kind of recreates that work in the next program that they go to, or they feel like they're going from one disconnected program to another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as you were saying, this is also an opportunity for students to do some of this research in addition to the teacher to do the research, right? So if you're going to get that class, that CDL, what does it take to get a CDL? Where do you have to go? Who do you have to talk to?
Right. Yeah, and that kind of segues us to the taking action section, which I would like to just touch on, even though I see it's 10 of, so we're a little near the end of the webinar, but please interrupt me, Eric, if people have comments, and I'm happy to pause.
Okay.
So yeah, look, just very quickly, why does it matter to take action? Or why does it even matter to bring this into the classroom? Well, it's hugely important for building skills, and that's partly what it's all about, right? I mean, people will usually need to do some research. It often involves some letter writing or speaking and listening. Students might actually win something. They might actually, by taking action, they might actually get something that they need, and so that adds to the relevance of the class in their lives in a really deep way. Even if you don't win, you often get the satisfaction of just using your voice, and that can be so empowering. And people, when I do this kind of stuff in my classroom, I just find students all the time are saying, "Well, I've never done anything like that before. I didn't even know you could," or "I didn't know you could meet with the mayor. You can meet with the mayor. Who knew you could meet?" So it's a huge revelation for people. And it's very empowering. Here's a story out of Tucson, Arizona, where this student noticed that one of his classmates wasn't coming to class for a while, and he kind of followed up with her and found out that she was riding her bike because the bus stopped running. The class ended at 8:30, but the bus stopped running at 8. And So that really didn't work for a lot of people in the class. They discovered, and so they organized a big campaign to get the bus to run later. And then in the process of talking with people, they discovered that in the Tucson heat there was no shelter at their bus station. And so this is really important, not just because of the sun beating down on you in Tucson, but during the rainy season, it's like monsoons down there, so the students didn't have anywhere to wait for the bus. And by their letter writing campaign and their advocacy, they got this shelter built right across the street from their program. So I think that was a great story to share with your students. I have this here just as some ideas for how people could take action in their own way. Here's another one that calls on a lot of math skills. This is one about how a propane-fueled school bus is a lot less polluting than a diesel-fueled school bus. And there's some math issues in here because a propane bus costs a little more than a diesel bus, but then over time you save money on fuel, and then in the long term you save money on people having health problems because there's less particulate matter in the air. And so the little activity here is to find out in your school district what kind of school buses does your school district use, and write a letter and find out. Maybe start to push your state or city to think about switching to propane buses. So that's the activity there. And that brings us to another slide where we're just basically asking for you to chime in. With this slide, I just wanted to put out the direct question, what are some challenges to trying out action steps with your students? Because I know, sometimes this can feel a little bit challenging for teachers to add this element to the classroom. Shouldn't I just stick with the 3 R's? Shouldn't I just kind of keep trying to get people through the GED? Isn't this a distraction from the regular schoolwork that we should be doing? What do you think some of the challenges might be for bringing this up in your class?
Okay, I'm going to unmute Barbara. So Barbara, did you want to chime in? Oh, okay. All right, Barbara, maybe you can do it via the question. So I think as people are typing, I think one of the interesting things about transportation as a topic is that we do hear stories around the country of classes that were able to successfully combine the academic work that the students were doing with this real world need that they had. So it didn't feel like time away from topics that they were supposed to be working on, and they were successful. So I think they picked up topics that mattered. They got a successful result, not every single time, but they did all the reading and writing that you want to be working on in class. Like as you said, it involves letter writing. So what's a formal letter look like? All right. So if you're writing the mayor or the city council, what needs to be in there? How should it be structured? Right. So all those kinds of things are really important literacy skills to work on, but it's in the context of something that matters to students.
Exactly.
All right, I'm going to try Barbara again. Barbara, you want to chime in? Nope. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just say even addressing the envelope is a great learning moment, and then getting a letter back from your state legislators is really great too. Students bring those in, and they're very excited to have heard back. And then these components of sharing and building community, and finding out what transportation challenges your fellow students have, and then addressing them. That just shows care. Mm-hmm. It shows concern. It shows collectivity. People are kind of bonding together to make something better. It's great on a lot of different levels.
And some of the municipal agencies that students will come in contact with are actually tasked with doing community outreach. So when I've done similar projects with my own classes, and my students ended up sending letters to the local hospital, local police, a couple of other institutions, and they sent us important information. Some of them, volunteered to come out and talk to the class about the hospital. So sometimes you'll find allies out there who are interested in reaching out and working with the students in your community.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
great.
So it's just about the top of the hour. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just a few things. The change agent, for those who don't know, it comes out twice a year. You can get an individual subscription or a bulk subscription or an online subscription. And if you get the online subscription, you can get PDFs of all of our back issues, and the students can access audio. So I really encourage people to look into that possibility. You can just go to our website and click on subscribe. It's incredibly inexpensive and just a ton of materials on our website for you to use. Here are the sources from some of the pieces that I brought into the webinar. I just wanted to include those in case anybody wanted to read more deeply into those topics. And finally, I just include my email address and Eric's, and just mention that the webinar is going to be available on the YouTube channel. So you have all that in the PDF that will be coming your way. And thank you all so much for being part of this. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to share this information with you.